Is it possible that we have been visited by aliens? Is it possible that the achievements of people, societies, and civilization long past were not their own? Is it possible that the knowledge of ancient people really came from aliens? Is it possible that these alien astronauts that possibly visited ancient civilizations have again come to visit in the 19th and 20th centuries? And is it possible that you're tired of my gag and want me to get to the point? The story is about Indiana Jones, but it's atypical as far as Indiana Jones stories go. Instead of delving into ancient ruins and catacombs for artifacts, Indy has to contend with seemingly extraterrestrial forces that command out-of-this-world firepower and are killing their way across the world and taking things for some nebulous plan. Despite the alienness of the vessel and craft involved in the attacks, Indy and his associates get the sense that these are not at all extraterrestrial, despite their explicit appearance as such. The reason that Indiana Jones gets involved is mainly concerned that these attackers, the titular Sky Pirates, seem to invoke the alienness of what ancient people used to depict in artistic, religious, and cultural contexts, as people and objects in the sky, long before modern-day technological surveillance and records. To summarize a great amount of dialogue and travelogue writing, the aircraft are of terrestrial origin, and they are explicitly made to invoke the technological supremacy of aliens from another world. They do this with an airship, disc ovoid aircraft, i.e. flying saucers, jet engines, vertical takeoff landing maneuvers, and attacks with deadly poison and explosive sabotage dressed up as death rays. In the trite kind of plan to take over the world, a cabal of millionaire/billionaire industrialists, who have staged their own deaths, control a network of collaborators and spies to make these alien attacks look convincing, and pose a problem to national governments of the world, given to whatever demands, material or political, or face death and destruction on a mass scale. Mind you, this is the 1930s. Atomic weapons are nowhere near conception. The death and destruction being threatened is the kind that was conceived in World War I. Mass poison and gas attacks against defenseless civilian populations. And to the frankly unimaginative cabal, these would be the pinnacle of human holocaust. This cabal has decided, in their overly privileged and disconnected way, that the only way to save humanity from destroying itself in war is to become overlord over all. Their plan is to pose as extraterrestrial overlords, as glorious and terrible as the gods and pantheons of antiquity. This plan might have even worked, had they the technological power bordering on magic and the logistics of a spacefaring species to call upon. Alas, on both accounts, they do not. Their technology on display is impressive in an anachronistic way, and their schemes do well against the unprepared and superstitious, except they're dealing with Indiana Jones. Indiana Jones, who in his canon has found the Ark of the Covenant and survived its god-serving, face-melting angels, found and invoked the power of destroyer goddess Shiva, and found the Holy Grail and passed its deadly tests of Christian faith, Indiana Jones turns his scholarly powers of observation onto these alien craft and their attacks and sees that there's nothing alien or even particularly supernatural about them. With contacts in intelligence and military matters and a bit of baiting with a couple of fake ancient artifacts, Indiana Jones gathers a team and sets up a scheme to draw out the Sky Pirates and their Cabal masters to show their hand and hopefully stop their deadly design for world domination. Suffice it to say, as thrilling as the final confrontation is, again, There's nothing alien about it. The fact that a cabal tried to invoke alien powers to take over the world bears discussion. Their audience was essentially the period modern world of men, who had endured a war to end all wars and, having survived, allegedly, that horror, might be starved for meaning that makes life worth looking forward to, especially when human life can be so cheaply tossed away with modern industry and imperial militarism. The time of the story is also post-Great Depression, so there's plenty of people that might be pliable to being ruled by alien overlords. And not everyone has the disposition to wonder if the aliens attacking are really aliens or rather well-dressed death squads. This cabal's plan is essentially to make the grandest, most audacious displays of deadly power in front of as many people as possible, so that when their network makes material and political demands of national governments, those governments would also be pressured by the people to acquiesce to their new extraterrestrial overlords. And for these plutocratic moguls that supposedly want to save humanity, no violence is too far and too egregious for that stated goal, and no number of wrongs done is too far gone for a greater good. Were it not for the 1930s period, the villainous cabal of moguls might have taken their inspiration from the 1968 book Chariots of the Gods, translated from the original German. This book presupposes, as astronomer Carl Sagan said, a religious and pseudoscientific telling of a group of all-powerful, all-knowing, all-benevolent beings which come from the sky to save and direct the so-called primitive humans, who supposedly regard them as gods in return. Under this book's thesis, if anything discovered in the remains of ancient civilizations seems more technologically advanced than presumed of a so-called primitive society, then it wasn't really conceived by humans, it must be aliens. More so-called evidence for this dogmatic thesis comes from the artwork of these ancient cultures that, if taken literally, would seem to suggest technologically advanced visitors, hence the Chariots of the Gods title. At no point is it considered that, just like modern times, humans would look to the sky, see phenomena they didn't understand, and would turn to creativity to tell stories. The religious, cultural, and artistic context shouldn't be ignored. Alas, the modern religious following of that ancient aliens dogma supposes that primitive people were not smart enough to recognize advanced technology when they see it, so what they call gods must be aliens. After all, believers in ancient alien astronaut theory believe that we, the supposedly more intelligent modern humans, would recognize the technology. For a cabal of moguls as disconnected from humanity as portrayed in story, it is the perfect belief system for validating their goals, dominating humanity by inducing a fearful religious following in wrathful extraterrestrial gods. It also follows in how they treat the Acoma tribe in America. When they lose their tanker tender in the Atlantic, their alien airship needs a place to land, a remote place, but still able to receive material resupply, not least of all helium, and people that can be contained or coerced into servicing their vessel and keeping their secret. The Cabal's airship and crew take control of the Sky City of the Acoma, and as Indy's crew finds out later, set up the place as a death trap to kill the Acoma if the United States Army Air Corps carpet bombs the airship on the ground. The airship crew, likely as their mogul bosses, do not respect the humanity of the Acoma tribe, so using them as human shields is no object. No matter how highly the Mogul Cabal and Sky Pirates think of themselves, and no matter how successfully they carry out their terrorism, the technology they use is an interesting aspect, for as advanced as it is for period 1930s technology and human experience, It is nowhere near alien, much less godly. Much ado is made about how the Cigar spacecraft, the airship, and the scimitar slash disc slash saucer shaped aircraft apparently do not have obvious exposed piston engines nor propellers, the only widely known aerial propulsion known at the time. Indian Company eventually make the connection that all alien aircraft seen are using jet engines hidden inside their bodies. In story, as well as real life, a Romanian-born inventor named Henri Coanda did design, produce, and patent a kind of proto-jet engine called a turbopropulsor, what we would call a motor jet, that produces thrust without using a propeller. It is a far cry from the turbojet function described in story, but the call-out is roughly accurate. It is no stretch that what Coanda patented in 1910 might have been extrapolated into the recognizable turbojet design by the Moguls in time for their pirates to instigate the story. Considering the aircraft themselves, the alien airship is described as uniform and with a golden shine to its skin, with no external features to give away its abilities or capacity for locomotion or destruction. This points to its jet engines being entirely internal, as well as its landing bay and hangar for its disc fighters, and its weapon emplacements, conventional as they are. I imagined two possibilities for the airship's propulsion. Either it has multiple turbojets exhausting from multiple ports, so that differential thrust can offer control, or else it uses one greater turboshaft engine and propeller, or turbofan engine that exhausts its thrust from a single port in the stern. Such a setup would give the impression to those on the ground that it moved without obvious means, assuming the flight crew can avoid atmospheric conditions that leave contrails as real jet engines do at altitude. The disc aircraft themselves are even more nebulously described. They're said to fly using jet engines and at high enough speeds that their circular wing is effective and not a hindrance, except in certain conditions. But they're also described as hovering vertically, presumably with jet engine thrust directed downward. At the same time, each one apparently has space for at least one machine gun, hardpoints for unguided rockets, and even space for at least a handful of people that disembark mid-hover. All this suggests these aircraft are less single-seat fighters and more multi-crew vehicles analogous to armored vehicles, and that calls for a certain set of requirements. For both jet-propelled flight and hovering, it should take at least 2 jet engines each, and they should be so advanced as to equal the engines of the real-life VTOL fighter, the Kestrel and Harrier, and their Pegasus vectored thrust turbofans. For one thing, it's unlikely one jet engine would be anywhere near enough to carry these craft, both in high-speed flight and especially in hover. Besides, despite the opportunity, the story doesn't present these aircraft as taking advantage of the Coanda effect. The effect discovered by Coanda that a high-speed fluid will follow the curve of a solid surface to some extent. When Coanda discovered and quantified this effect, it was followed on by at least a couple other patents for aircraft to fly using this effect, which is its own discussion. But taking the disc aircraft as presented in story, they don't seem to use the Coanda effect to fly, nor do they seem to have a ring of engines around the circumference that would imply taking advantage of that effect. Thus, to be stable in hover, they would essentially need Pegasus vectored thrust jet engines that distribute their vectored thrust in a way that can be stable and controllable. Designing my own flying saucer is a fun project I want to show later. What all this means for the Sky Pirate aircraft and their masters' plans for world domination is that they can perform unexpected feats of flight and violence, but when caught in the open, are just as vulnerable to attack as other period aircraft. When Indiana Jones and his crew confront the pirates in the sky, they do so at a height that the saucers don't perform or maneuver as well. As spelled out in story, their circular wings are not as efficient when the air is thinner, while they're not going as fast as they need to. Different wing shapes and forms perform and maneuver differently, depending on air density and airspeed. And these disc aircraft weren't made to maneuver and fight at high altitude. While a Ford trimotor does struggle at the same height, the fight is much more even. Even jet engines have a limit on how high they can fly and still work. In other words, it's completely realistic that jet engines, even those advanced for the period, can become underpowered at a high enough altitude, long before modern advances make that flight regime usable. These are not chariots of the gods, as the moguls wanted to present. Once Indy's crew in their trimotor take down the disc aircraft, they turn on the airship, which only has human-operated machine guns for defense. These guns and the helium are not enough to defend against the trimotor's rocket attack, which burns the airship and decisively ends the Sky Pirate threat.